Welcome to the Record Player, everybody. Scott with you. I'm so happy today to be joined by my guest, who is a world-renowned singer-songwriter whose career has spanned 5 decades, nearly 5 decades. His debut album in 1974 saw him opening for Supertramp on their Crime of the Century tour. And he, of course, went on to become a superstar in his own right with albums like Spanish Train and Other Stories, The Getaway, Into the Light, as well as classic hits, A Spaceman Came Travelling, Patricia The Stripper, High on Emotion, my favorite Krista Burgh song, Don't Pay The Ferryman, and of course the #1 worldwide smash hit all over the world, Lady in Red. He's sold over 45 million albums worldwide, and he has a brand new record out called The Legend of Robin Hood. Krista Burgh joins us on the Record Player. How are you, Chris?
Wow, what a very nice introduction. I was beginning to think you were talking about somebody else there.
That was all you, my friend.
Oh, that's amazing, amazing. Well, I'm talking to you here in Ireland, in the hills of Wicklow, which are today is quite sunny. And I'm very, very fond of your part of the world because not only have I visited many times, and back in the sort of mid-70s when I was, as you say, I was just the guitar player opening up for Supertramp, which is, I tell you, is a very tough gig when you're just one guy on the stage for 20 minutes and people are going, boo, 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 get off. And you have to have a tough back for that. But I also had a Canadian band, and we spent a lot of time in Toronto, not only hanging out in the beaches and down Queen Street East. And I remember there was a Chinese restaurant called The Goof that your viewers may remember because some of the words had disappeared. So it said, tried to say good food, but the bit in the middle was missing. And there were loads of places. And also down Spadina, very fond of Chinese food. Down Spadina, there was a place, of course, you know, the first place I played actually was the El Macambo. I remember they put on a concert for me there and solo, and it sold out, and so I did 2 in the El Macambo the same night. Yeah, I'm very fond. I played the Gardens, I played Massey Hall, the Hummingbird, and I'm back there again, if I'm allowed to say. Wait a second, where are we here now? Toronto, yeah, 1 second. This is embarrassing. I couldn't remember it. Montreal, Quebec, Moncton, London, Ontario. Oh, here we go. What used to be the Sony Centre in Toronto on the 30th of April, preceded on the 27th in London, Ontario, and then the next day in St. Catharines. So yeah, I know your part of the world very well. I love it.
That's all. Well, most of those places that you played back then are still around. Not all of them.
That's good to know.
Still around.
Yeah.
I know we're on a time difference. You mentioned you're in Ireland. We're here in Canada. You're ahead of us. You've probably been doing press for this all day, so I appreciate you joining us.
Not at all.
The new record. It's a hell of a story to tackle. I mean, obviously, you know, an existing storyline like Robin Hood, and you're creating new music for it. How did that project come about? How exactly did that idea happen?
There's a little town in Germany called Fulda, and Germany is a very strong country for me. I've done lots of touring. I've done extremely well there, and a very loyal audience, like in Canada. But I was asked by a group called Spotlight Productions, who've already mounted 8 successful musicals, would I be interested in co-writing a musical called Robin Hood? Now, they've done their research pretty well. They knew I was brought up in an old castle, and that I had an interest in medieval history. And also, I had a relative called Hubert de Burgh, who was King John and King Richard's chief lawmaker, chief justiciar, who features in the Shakespeare play of King John. And he was the second most powerful man in England. And all this kind of came together, and I thought, I'll give this a shot. And as you were talking about Robin Hood, you know, as we were developing the story, and I was working on the storyline with other writers, and I wrote 8 songs for the story that we created. Nobody knows if the guy even existed, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the idea of robbing, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor sounds more like the tax authorities than anything else. He may not have even done that. You don't know. But if you stop 100 people on I don't know, somewhere Avenue or Bloor or somewhere, Robin Hood, they'll say, rob from the rich, gave to the poor, Marion, the outlaws, the merry men, the sheriff of Nottingham, and then it kind of gets a bit murky. So that's why you can exist. I watched all the movies. I had to laugh when I heard Kevin Costner saying, "Hi, I'm Robert Loxley." this American accent. But so you can actually take the principal ideas and then develop them. And because there wasn't an existing story, we writing the musical had to come up with our own story. And for me, I developed my own slight difference. And I've also written a book over the lockdown, which expands the story here on the album. To really, and I narrated it myself. It's available on Amazon and Spotify as an audiobook. And I had the opportunity then to put on voices of some of the people involved, also some of the music from the album. We have The Wedding Feast, for example, where Robin is an obnoxious teenager and he's drunk. And he doesn't want to marry. He's 19. He doesn't want to marry this 13-year-old girl he barely knows. And at the wedding feast, all these noble people and emissaries from the king, and the father stands up and he says, "And now I ask my son Robin, would you stand up and say a few words to our distinguished guests here today?" So I could, Robin gets up, but then we see another side of his character, and this is all expanded in the book. This is something I wish I'd done years ago with like Spanish Train and Spaceman Came Travelling. I did it in a greater extent with an album called The Story Man, where I wrote what I see as the bigger part of the story, because with the lyrics you have to condense everything. You have to make it succinct. But so with this audio book, I was able to tell the whole story, and I asked the audience, which when we bring to the stage, I will ask the audience to imagine they're in a tavern in the 18th century, and the candles, and there were straw bales and people with tankards of beer, and a group of players, musicians, and actors and dancers and poets get up on a small stage and they tell this story. So when you're in the audience, you will be asked to participate in this kind of feeling. And that, for me, that's why on Moonfleet, which is a beautiful book that I did an expanded album on, there was a narrator all the way through advancing the story. With this album, what I did was I had that imagination. We go back to these guys who then tell a little bit more about the story. So I hope it works, and certainly it seems to be doing well.
When I listened to it for the first time, I listened to the narration part first, and then I listened to the record, and it really sets up the whole story. And like you said, it's condensed. The songs are more condensed, so you get a much larger idea of your vision of Robin Hood by listening.
Oh, great! So you heard the narration. That's brilliant.
Totally did.
For me, it helps enormously. And I was just saying to one of your colleagues earlier, do you have children?
Yep, 5 of them.
Yep. Well done. When you tell children a story, they don't look at you, they look like that. Yeah. They're living in their imagination. Yeah. And for me, that is the most powerful tool that human beings have. When the first human beings looked up at the moon and they went, "What on earth is that?" And then the years went by, centuries, and then one day somebody said, "We're going to go there." And that's the dream that human beings can have. We can dream big dreams. Most of the time they come to nothing. But in our personal lives, when I started in this business, it was very tough being the opening act for a band like that, Supertramp. But I previously learned to have a really hard neck by performing in a restaurant. And you sing in a restaurant, it's tough. So if you're ever in a restaurant as a performer and piano player, be kind. It's just a pretty tough job. But and that's really what takes you through the dream. I mean, you just spoke about "Don't Pay the Ferryman." Come with me a second. I want to show you something. Sure. Well, first of all, I want to show you where I am. I'm out the hills of Wicklow out there. Beautiful sunny day. And this is where I work. This is my guitars here, and so on. I'm coming in here. Let's have a look. This is what I call my memorabilia room.
If you ever need to sell your house, Chris, we can use this video and
Thank you. It's actually up for sale right now. And it's good fun. And you actually mentioned a particular. Let me just show you something here. Hang on a second. I've got a guitar here, and here we go. Just a bit of it. It was late at night on the open road, speeding like a man on the run. A lifetime spent preparing for the journey. Don't pay the ferryman. That's it.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that. When I think of Don't Pay the Ferryman and all your work for that matter, I think of you're so good at telling stories. Obviously, being a songwriter, you have to be. But I mean, for you, it was always the fantasy part of the story, and you're so good at sort of,
Yep.
getting everybody in their own heads with that. Did you ever get approached to do films and soundtrack work and stuff like that, whether it be the score or the whole soundtrack?
To a certain extent, I mean, my songs have been used in quite a few films, particularly this one. I've never seen you looking so lovely as you did tonight, lady in red. But there have been songs I've written, which I think was one on my album called The Story Man, called The Grace of a Dancer. And that for me is, if I would put my top 3 songs in there, I would put probably Spanish Train, The Grace of a Dancer, and one other. I haven't thought of which, possibly. But The Grace of a Dancer is an epic story about a young man who lives in the big house up on the hill and this young girl, and they fall in love, and she's just a servant girl, and she disappears one day because she discovers she's pregnant, and he spends years and years looking for her. And then he takes a ship across the ocean to get away from his broken heart, and they hit a terrible storm, and he finds himself in the water, and he hears these cries and the thunder and the lightning and the rain's pouring down and the seas crashing against the rocks, and he hears this woman calling out, help, help, and he swims over and he grabs the woman. There's a little boy with her, and they fall onto the sand, and she suddenly says to him, thank you. And it's the same, this is his son. He saved his own son and the girl who thought it drowned in herself years and years before. So that would make one hell of a guy. I just know it'd make a great film.
You did Light a Fire from The Getaway. I always go back to The Getaway.
Yeah.
That's my favorite album.
Yeah, yeah.
So I always
okay.
But you did Light a Fire for this new. You redid it for the Robin Hood project. Did you go back? Was there any other old songs that you kind of looked at and thought about bringing back for this project, or did that one just fit with the Robin Hood theme?
Well, what happened there was during the writing for the musical, the co-musician that I was working with, Dennis Martin, he said they wanted to think about using one of my songs in the musical. Mm-hmm. Now, originally, I was a little bit concerned about this because I didn't want it to be, I've been to musical because I went to a lot to learn how writing for a musical is so different. God, it's really challenging because, you're halfway through a song and suddenly they start talking and that kind of thing. And also you have this thing where nowadays you have to, for example, a girl will be talking and then she's like, you have to go from talking into singing like that sort of seamlessly these days. But he suggested using Don't Pay the Ferryman. And I went, okay. And it's in German. Now, I don't speak the language, but it'll be fine. They think it's called, they use, what's it? Freiheit for Nottingham. Freiheit for Nottingham. Freedom for Nottingham. And I thought Light a Fire would be better for the musical. But then I thought, as the speech preceding that song, when he's talking to the outlaws and he's trying to convince them that he could be their leader, which is tough because he comes as a nobleman. They hate noblemen, the outlaws in the forest. And then you may have noticed the tempo builds and builds and builds like a good orator should. And then at the end, he's, we're going to go out there, we're going to light a fire. And that was the last thing he said. And I thought, well, why not use the song? So I changed the lyrics a bit and added a bit in the middle.
Mm-hmm. It still sounds great, though. It still sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
The song I'm Falling in Love is one of my favorite songs off the record. Who's the female singer that you sang that with?
Her name is Louise. God, double barrel name. I'm so sorry. I don't actually have it here. But,
didn't mean to put you on the spot.
My guitar. No, sorry. Her name is Louise. I've never met her. Would you believe that?
Really?
But what happened was, but I wanted to get a sympathetic voice, female voice there. And when she's done a lot of singing on my previous album, and Chris Porter, my co-producer for 10 albums, he suggested using her when I heard it. But that song, I'll give you probably, if you've listened to the story, you know the background where Robin has gone up to the bedchamber and then he sees this terrified young girl and so on. And when she runs to the window in the morning and he's left, and she shouts, Thank you, and I love you. That for me is a moment where not only has he already shown his compassion and his empathy, but they at that moment that night, although he did consummate the marriage or touch her at all, he shows a compassionate side that is really the first most important change in his life. And the second one is when he's come back from the Crusades and he's in the forest, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, like so many young men do, coming back from war. They've done things, they've seen things that are so horrific. So he goes, lives in the forest, and then those Marion and two other former soldiers come to see him and say, "You have to come with us." And he says, "No, not interested. Leave me alone, please. I want to suffer here in silence." So they eventually convince him, and they take him to a local village where the poverty is absolutely terrible because of the king's taxation. So at that point, he says, the change happens, and he says that moment then he becomes a hero. He says, "I'm going to do something about this because I can."
I'm sure, switch gears from Robin Hood just a minute. I'm sure you've heard a million Lady in Red stories probably over the years. A friend of mine was at a Christmas dance. He was there with a woman, his date, and she took off with somebody else halfway through the night. And later on, he's standing there and he looks over across the dance floor and he sees this woman wearing a red dress. The DJ plays Lady in Red. They've now been married for 30 years, have grandkids. So that's his story that he told me. And there's millions of them, I'm sure. Lady in Red is I think one of the 20 most played songs on the planet. I mean, that's a hell of an accomplishment right there.
Wow.
I've interviewed people who hate that song, not that song particularly. I mean, that song that they, that one song that they are constantly playing, constantly get asked to play. Where does Lady in Red fall for you? Do you dislike that song? Do you still love that song? I mean, where does that fall in the realm of your career?
Well, when I play it, I'm not thinking of me. I'm thinking of people listening to it, because obviously it means a lot to them. So I'm empathetic. I'm an empathetic kind of person. When I do a concert, for example, when I perform there in Toronto, I will not be thinking about a bunch of people in front of me. I will be thinking about what they've gone through to get to that concert. Not only the cost, but if they've got small children, they get a babysitter. Yeah. They've traveled. They've come from all over the Ontario, perhaps. That's what I think about. And I think you can never shortchange them. It's so bloody rude to say, "I'm not going to do that song," or whatever, just because you're sick of it. On the other hand, it has been a key. I know a lot of people don't like it, and a lot of people do like it. But it's a key to open the door to that artist's particular music, and that's been a fantastic thing. As you say, it's a huge song in America, Canada, in worldwide, Moscow, in Russia. I go to a lot to perform, but I actually see it very close to what you just told me. I see it as a couple going out for the evening, and she's upstairs putting on her makeup, and he's stamping around saying, "We're late," and they go to the party in frosty silence, and he goes to meet his pals and has a few Canadians or whatever, Molson Canadian or whatever you're drinking yourself. And then the thing, as you said about your friend, and he goes across the room and he sees this beautiful girl wearing a red dress, and she's surrounded by admirers, and it takes him that millisecond thinking, "But hold on, that's my wife, that's my partner." And then that's the click. He goes up to her and they dance. He says, "Look, I'm sorry, I haven't spent enough time with you recently." That's why the word "never" is so important in that song. He knows. I mean, how many men do you know, or indeed me, who know what their wives or their partner was wearing the last time they went out? I haven't a clue. Women remember. We don't. We're hopeless. We can remember cleavage or a short dress, and that's about it. But so that's the point in the song where I think it becomes seriously. It's a serious side, I mean, people do split up because they don't spend enough time together. They don't notice that when your partner comes home after a tough day, just give her a hug. That's why, I mean, during the pandemic, I know, unfortunately, quite a few people who split up because the proximity has become too much for them. Mm-hmm. But what Lady in Red was trying to do, it's not just a sickly love song. It's much more than that. It's an effort to try and make people realize you've got to look at your partner. And actually, the funniest story I had lots of funny stories about Lady in Red, was I was accepting an ASCAP award, Association of Composers and Publishers, American Society, and I went to the stage and I said, I understand that this song has been used for procreation on many, many occasions, and 3 minutes 25 seconds of pure love. And then the next guy up to receive an award was Phil Collins, and he says, "I don't know what Christopher does with the other 3 minutes." Made me laugh a lot. Oh, yeah, something like that. Anyway, but that was pretty funny. Yeah, it's when I'm dead and gone, that's still going to be around, and I think every songwriter. Okay, I've come up with a bunch of standards like Spaceman Came Travelling. You mentioned Spanish Train, Patricia The Stripper. Let me think, what else you got there? Don't Pay The Ferryman, High in Emotion. When I think of you, and stuff like that, which will last, many of them. But that one is going to be the one that it will be my calling card, and has been for years.
A Spaceman Came Travelling, you mentioned that. I mean, that's turned into years after you recorded it, and not necessarily meant to be. It became a Christmas song. You know, it's suddenly.
Absolutely, yeah. It became a Christmas song, and I wrote it on a hot August day in London. And I was thinking about Eric von Däniken and his Chariots of the Gods and the Nazca Indians. And I was also thinking of a wonderful poem by Irish poet William Butler Yeats called The Second Coming, where he believed that there's a gyre in human history where every 2,000 years there's a major catastrophic change, which is probably we're living through right now. And a whole bunch of ideas. And then I thought about, well, maybe the Star of Bethlehem was a spacecraft, and it was above the nativity and so on. And it has become a Christmas standard, much to my surprise.
If I was to look on your, not, you've already shown me the house, but if I was to look on your turntable, what is it that you're listening to? I mean, do you listen to new music? Do you listen to current artists? Or are you like me and just go back and listen to the old stuff?
I tend to listen to the old stuff that I like, and to keep my voice in shape, I tend to play my own records because I can remember the words and the chords. But I listen. If I'm listening to music, I like classical music, because for me these are the geniuses. We're what we call in Ireland in the halfpenny place compared to these guys, Mozart and when I went to St. Thomas Church in Leipzig recently, I actually was in tears looking at the gravestone of Johann Sebastian Bach, where he used to play the organ. I mean, these guys for me are the top men, and they're the geniuses.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. I know, like I said, I know you're doing this kind of all day, probably. Getting ready for the new record. I wish you the best of luck with the album, Legend of Robin Hood, the story of Robin Hood through the eyes of Chris de Burgh. Is that play still getting done? Are they still playing?
Oh yes, it'll be on next year. It'll be next year, yeah.
Fantastic. I wish you all the luck with the record. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. I appreciate it.
It's been okay. See you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.